Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. This is a weekly podcast in which I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop, RPG, and surrounding space. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Mannell. Hello.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining me. Again, this is a rare contrast where we're on either other sides of the planet. It's the morning for you, it's the evening for me, and we just found time within our time schedules to have a little chat about tabletop RPGs and cool stuff.
Time difference. It's the bane of my existence a lot of the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, so do you kind of when you play like any sort of tabletop, do you play with people across like time zones as often, or?
I haven't done that recently. I have a couple of times, maybe like many years ago, but most of the time, I generally prefer to play in person.
Yeah.
And so I think honestly, it's just kind of a personal preference thing for me. Like I definitely prefer
I like that
instant kind of facial,
The ideal one is like obviously having like some amazing configuration of terrain with everyone like with their figurines and dice.
Absolutely,
and stuff like that.
I think it's probably true that the time difference is like the straw that broke the camel's back in that situation. Maybe I would play online more if there wasn't kind of a 10-hour 5-hour thing.
Having to wait. I don't know. I like the indie as typically when I play and stuff like that because it's at like an appropriate time. I don't know how much I would like it as much if I was waking up at like 8 o'clock in the morning to kind of get up and play it. Well, time differences and all that aside, I guess kind of for the people listening then, what sort of tabletop RPG stuff have you been making? What have you been throwing out there?
So I think I'm in a kind of an interesting position where I feel like I've done a bunch of stuff that kind of hasn't come out yet, and a lot of the first things that I worked on also haven't become available. So the stuff that I'm probably most known for, I guess, is the stuff that I've been doing through MCDM, working with that team, which mostly at the stage involves Kingdoms and Warfare, right? Like that's kind of the first big project that my name is attached to in any way. But before that, I did Uncaged. I feel like that was kind of the thing that I first did that was kind of public facing and not just for my own enjoyment.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I have done a lot of work for Arcadia, the magazine that MCDM has been putting out, working with James and Tricazo on that, which has been a great time.
Nice. So yeah, it sounds like I guess kind of to get like the chronology. I'm gonna mess up the word. The order of things from start to finish.
Nailed it. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. If I can't say the word, just don't. Did you kind of get things started like from Uncaged, or was it kind of prior to that? Is it Moon over Greymore?
Oh yeah. So that was the first thing that I put out kind of by myself. But I didn't really think anything would come of that, I guess. I just did that. I don't really remember why I did that. Because practice, I guess, probably.
Yeah, that's always like one of my questions is what was there sometimes like the driving force of like, you there's a lot of like preparation that goes into like home games, and there's always that kind of sometimes that tripping point where you're just like, I should write some of these notes up into something, or was it that you had like an adventure seed that you were just like, I should just make something with this, or?
No, the former. So that one came out of I just had some players that couldn't show up for the usual game, and so I was like, well, I have to create something else.
Yeah.
And I just slapped that together with some bullet points and ran it, and it was such a big hit at my table that I was like, I feel like I should write this up and make it look nice. But it was always going to be for free because I didn't have the budget to like get original art and stuff like that and make it look as nice as I wanted to. I wasn't really interested in putting out something that I felt like didn't look like something that I would want. So I was just like, well, that's fine. I just won't make money off this. And then I didn't think about it for many years.
Yeah.
And then eventually that is, I think, what got me the gig working on Player's Guide to Capital, which is a forthcoming MCDM book.
Yeah.
I don't know what their plans are releasing that, but that was kind of, I consider that kind of my big break, even though it's not out yet.
Yeah, I think especially with things with like, again, long kind of like production pipelines, I think like everyone's like with an issue, there are points where like, oh yeah, I've done like 30 projects, 15 of them will be out next year at some point,
at some
or
stage.
Like, yeah. And stuff
but yes, also Uncaged. You brought up Uncaged. That I do. Yeah, I did work on that. That was I feel like that is probably more accurately kind of a break, I guess, because it was the first big kind of collaborative thing that I worked on. That was a great time. Loads of really interesting, talented people came out of that project.
I was gonna say, and obviously the conceit of like Encaged is the fact that they're taking kind of monsters and kind of like subverting them and kind of rewriting kind of some of their origins in kind of like a new light. What was the kind of what was the focus of your adventure?
I did a Medusa Adventure, I think, and I believe that all of the credit for that probably goes to my girlfriend who was like, I have a good idea for an adventure, but I don't want to have to do any of the legwork, which is how a lot of my design process goes. So I will steal her ideas and she's like, I'm happy to not have to write anything. You can take credit. That sounds bad. I offer her.
No, it's a collaboration of, it's
exactly.
Bouncing ideas off. And again, the ideas wouldn't be made without your legwork by as much as they wouldn't even start without, your partner's creativity. So it's 50-50.
So she kind of came up with the premise for that. And then I had fun turning it into a big weird thing. I was listening to so she came up with the idea for the character of the Medusa being kind of unfairly maligned by her kind of spoilers, I guess. Skip this if you want to play that adventure, by her father. And then I think I was listening to a BBC podcast about Automata. It was the what's it called? In Our Time. Kind of polarizing podcast. I like a lot of those episodes. Some of them I think could use a little bit of work, but a super interesting podcast to check out if people like listening to podcasts. Yeah, in Our Time is really interesting. They cover just kind of all sorts of different weird topics from history. I think I listened to the.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So, what exactly were they chatting about on the podcast?
It was like Automata, I think. And so there's like a weird kind of flavor in there of automation and kind of like agency and stuff like that I found fun to kind of mix in.
No, I think it's always interesting because, like, I think within kind of like mythos as well, the Medusa as a whole is something of like a tragic character. It's kind of I think a series of like misunderstanding, and then the tale unfortunately ends with, I think, Medusa's head being beheaded.
Yes.
Which, I mean, like, that's probably not, the nicest way for their tragic shit tale to end.
Absolutely. Definitely one of the myths that I think is always due for a rework.
So I guess, what was some of the kind of like challenges in because obviously sometimes I find I come up with kind of like interesting kind of adventure seeds. But then sometimes it's always a case of like, okay, well, how do I guess kind of like expand it? Like so it's a fully fledged adventure and not just necessarily like a singular kind of encounter. Did you kind of have some of these kind of difficulties in kind of translating this kind of Medusa tale? Or
I think when it comes to kind of expanding out like the kernel of an idea into a full adventure, there are always kind of stumbling blocks that you kind of come across. And I think it's just a question of how you deal with those. And I think a lot of the time the solution is just to put it down and sit on it for a little while, because I definitely know what you're saying, but I feel like in my experience the things that get finished, the adventures that get finished, are the ones that I somehow manage to not think too hard about that part of the equation, and it just kind of flows naturally from beginning to end. Maybe that sounds like a bit of a cop out.
No, 100%. I think there are definitely like those times where it's almost part of like the kind of idea selection process where you look at like your list of ideas or kind of like basic concepts, and you can kind of get a feel for the ones that kind of have legs to kind of start off with, other than the ones where it's just like there's like, again, my classic one that I use in the podcast is Goblin Cannon. Very cool idea. I can't necessarily form a whole adventure around Goblin Cannon. It's kind of it's a one-shot thing, much like the canon itself. But I kind of echo some of that. I did also kind of want to ask as a bit of like a kind of segue into like one of your other DMsGuild titles, which is it Milori's or just I just want to get the pronunciation of Milori's Guide to Languages.
Yeah, I would say that's probably correct. I stole that name. That's from Planescape. So you'll have to ask somebody else.
Okay, no, regardless of if it's right or wrong, that's canon now for me. And I'll just say that's Milori. Everyone knows Milori.
All right, good. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yeah, because it's like an impressive kind of catalog of essentially like the linguistic origins of all the languages within 5e.
Yeah. I don't know. I just thought that was a bit of fun. I studied linguistics in university, and so that's kind of where that came from.
That was going to be my next question. Of like, obviously, I always find it's always this interesting because like sometimes when people's kind of like backgrounds, like their occupation or their studies, kind of bleeds through in some of their products. And it seems like this was like almost like a one-to-one translation of like, why I know a good amount about linguists. Linguism? Am I?
I think it should be linguism. Maybe linguistics.
Sorry, I'm making a fool of myself. I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I definitely that was an interesting project in that it taught me a little bit more about linguistics too. There's a couple of things that I would probably go back and change, just for kind of because I feel like I remember a couple of people reviewing it and being like, actually, this is not how this would work. And I'm like, oh, you are correct. So I don't know quite as much about linguistics as maybe that project suggests that I do. There are definitely some mistakes in there.
Well, I think there's definitely a good amount of leeway because I think from kind of like, again, at least the kind of hardcover books, there's not the huge amount of support in this topic as you would expect. That I imagine it's a good amount of it is kind of going off of. I don't know, like what kind of resources did you have kind of like based on like, you know, like some of the like halfling languages or kind of that sort of aspects? Was it more just like making it up as you go, or was there kind of a good amount to kind of draw from the existing kind of lore and all that?
It's kind of a mix, right? Like I feel like I remember a lot of it just being me kind of having some free time and being like, this will be a bit of fun, and then just kind of making it up as I go along. But I definitely do remember occasionally doing some research on some of them in particular, mostly because there was like a few there are a few languages in there that I definitely took inspiration from kind of real world things, and then there are a couple that I remember doing like a lot of research. I feel like Undercommon was one of them. I feel like I remember looking into Undercommon because I felt like surely there was already some kind of in the past 50 years somebody has written something about these, and finding it like quite sparse. There wasn't a lot of stuff in there. There's just kind of some scattered kind of lexicon entries, and then using that to be like, well, I can kind of fill in the gaps in a lot of these bits.
So I guess kind of as you kind of mentioned, so what are some of the things that you kind of mentioned you would like to kind of, if you had the time and the ability to kind of go back and kind of improve, what are some of the things that you look back and go, oh, maybe I could change bits and bobs about it?
I remember somebody mentioning that one of the it might have been it was either one of the like the Aarakocra languages or one of the elemental ones, like the air language, being like, you should do something interesting with people having to talk with a beak. And I was like, I should have. That's a good idea. There was something else as well, I think with Giant, that someone pointed out that like I had made some assertions about how Giant was difficult to speak unless you had lungs big enough.
Oh yeah.
Somebody said, actually, giants would just think that everybody sounds really funny because they would sound like they're all on helium because they have tiny little squeaky voices.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's also funny. I would probably put that back in if I ever did a revision of that. But yeah, that's one of those things as well where I kind of just did it for fun. And like, I kind of threw caution to the wind regarding using other people's ideas and kind of official IP and stuff like that. Like I don't even know if I think Planescape is legit if you just put it on the DMsGuild for free. Yeah. But like I mentioned, like that character Milori, the one who narrates the whole book, I think is just straight out of one of the Planescape books. And I was just like, oh, I think she is canonically a linguist as well.
And you have a good amount of like leeway in terms of like, there's bound to be plenty of other people in this, the Forgotten Realms, also called Milori, or plane shifting and stuff. People can get around. It's like not hard to get around kind of these days. But no, I don't know. I just kind of found the kind of the concept of the like kind of product stuff like just really kind of fascinating, just because again, I'm as I said earlier with my linguism, I'm not a linguist. So it's always kind of fascinating when someone kind of brings their kind of any elements of their kind of like passions or interests and kind of look at it through a lens of like, okay, well, within this fantasy world, what happens if we apply these kind of techniques and understanding of things to see how kind of things grow.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly niche, right? Like I didn't make that expecting that it was going to be a big hit and that people would use it at their table. I made it because I was like, I honestly just kind of want to get my own thoughts down on paper, because this matters to me as somebody who has studied linguistics. Like why does common exist everywhere and it's all the same? Like I felt like I wanted to come up with a reason for that, just to explain it to myself. And I feel like that's kind of the creative process in general for me, is me being like, well, how would this work at my table?
Yeah.
And then run with whatever that idea is.
Because I think what I kind of like about sometimes the kind of niche projects that you kind of like work on is the fact that sometimes it is always like, say you were like a character and you're creating like, again, you're creating a linguist as your character, and you just need a resource to kind of better ground yourself in the world.
Yeah.
This guide to language is almost like the perfect thing for like as a player to kind of be able to kind of like sound the part without too much kind of effort. And that's what I kind of love. Totally. Like the same with all like herbalism guides, the kind of like trackers guides, those kind of things that allow you to kind of maybe step out your comfort zone and play like a particular kind of character.
I love that stuff.
But I did want to like kind of latch onto something you just said about just kind of your creative process. Is it very much so that kind of like a lot of things that you kind of do, they stem from your home game?
I would say probably yes. I think it kind of comes from all over. It's not just my home game, but like a lot of stuff probably does come from there, in that like I find it a good place to test stuff and then kind of keep in my back pocket. And maybe a project comes up that needs some kind of weird system, and I can be like, well, here's something that I've already used, which kind of works. We can see if it works properly after some work. But yeah. So I would say partially, sure.
Yeah. I think it's always nice to kind of treat your home tables as essentially pre-play testers in their own way. Like they get the earliest, they get the roughest versions of things kind of cobbled together, and things that work kind of go through that kind of next iteration.
It kind of took me a little while to get comfortable with that. Like I definitely went through a period where I was like, I feel like everything has to be perfect, and I wasn't like literally thinking that. I just didn't think about it at all. And then at some stage I heard or saw somebody say, it's okay to mess stuff up at the table. And like I'd heard that a million times before, but I feel like I hadn't really got it. But it's true that like you can just sort of throw stuff at the wall and then be like to your players, look, okay, that was a disaster, let's undo that, and people will be kind of fine with that. Like it does kind of mess with verisimilitude, I guess, but like I don't know.
I think there's always there's that dual thing of like, you hear all the like advice of like it's okay to kind of like mess up at your table. You're like, yeah, it would be good. I don't want to mess up on my table.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really difficult, I think, to actually fully understand, kind of internalize these lessons that kind of get thrown about, because there's so much advice out there for running the game and playing the game, and it all kind of makes sense on paper, but it does take a while to allow that stuff to kind of sink in, and then you hit upon kind of an example where you're like, oh, now I get it. And that is definitely one of those things for me where I was like, I just suddenly feel like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders, because I'm going to give myself the permission to just try stuff, and then if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and that's totally fine.
Because I think sometimes it kind of you almost, just by kind of releasing yourself of those, as I say, releasing yourself of these shackles as if it's on this almighty revelation. But like once you kind of, I guess, have that kind of, again, a good amount of it is kind of that comfort with your table to know that after it happening, 3 people aren't going to just leave the table and storm off home or anything.
I think you've only kind of got a certain amount of goodwill there, and knowing the people makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And then kind of like building on that is just that kind of the player's trust to like, if this works, this could be awesome. Because again, you're only really bringing stuff that you think would be amazing to the table. You're not thinking, well, you may be designing some devious traps or some sort of really evil things to kind of test out on players. Like, I don't know, a Goblin Cannon. That the players can kind of come away with afterwards, going, "What was that about? Why were they firing goblins at us?" And I'm just like, who knows? Maybe you'll get to the bottom of this. Maybe you won't. I think at this point, I think I am committed to make a Goblin Cannon.
I think at this point I'm committed to make a Goblin Cannon.
You know what? Please, I honestly,
that's such a good idea.
I'm just so cool. At this point, like I've literally been talking about it for what feels like years, and I'm saving it. I'm just I need the right moment where I can justify why, and I don't think I'm ever going to get there. But as a not so smooth segue onto like I guess some of your work with kind of Arcadia, or I guess not just Arcadia, but kind of like your catalog of kind of work as a whole, is because you've kind of done a little bit of everything. Like obviously going from like the adventure to obviously like the book of languages. You've got the kind of like spells from Arcadia, as well as what was it, sky flying rules essentially.
The Aces High, the dogfighting. Aerial combat,
like a real kind of like mix of kind of all sorts, really. Is that kind of like you just kind of enjoy that kind of, I guess, versatility of just dipping in and out of every kind of like spell systems, like combat systems?
Yeah, I think that is probably part of me. Just if I hit upon an idea that I feel like I'm jazzed about, I feel inspired, then just to follow it and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to follow any. I don't know. It's all fun. Like I've never really considered sticking to just one thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think typically I like adventures the most, if I had to pick one, because they are a great way to do everything. Like if you publish an adventure, you can have magic items in it that are new. You can have new spells in it if you want. You can monsters. Like,
design monsters, design. It literally is the best of both, like best of everything. So then I guess what is it? If we start with like some of the kind of spells then in kind of, was it, I think issue 3 of Arcadia was the was it wait, I've got it here. Alabasters. That's Arcadia number 5. I switched my numbers around. 3 is the Aces High. There you go.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
you could have fooled me.
Here I was trying to seem like I've done my research, and I've just put my foot in it. I'll throw it back to you. What would you like to talk about first?
Out of those two articles,
we'll
go with Alabasters. That's a fine choice.
Yeah. So I guess what was kind of like the I guess what was the like the inspirational spark that kind of think of like, let's create like some kind of mini spells.
That is so Arcadia, when it first kind of started, Matt Colville kind of pitched it as being the same sort of vibe as early Dragon magazine, stuff like that. And I had the good fortune to, around about the same time, pick up a whole bunch of old Dragon magazines from my local game store, where somebody dropped off a bunch of them for $1 each, and I snapped a whole bunch of them up. Because I really like.
I was just to clarify. So when you say snatch, are we talking like 50? Or are we talking about like 200? Like what's the scale of?
I think maybe like 20, not that many. There were like hundreds there, but they all disappeared pretty quickly. I would go back every weekend and try to get a few more as the prices went down, as the owner of the shop realized that they probably weren't going to move.
I was going to say,
but I definitely feel like I should have got more of them.
The way you were looking off screen there, I was worried that there was like a humongous kind of pile.
There is kind of a small stack. So I picked up a bunch of those. I love reading through those, even just kind of for the history of the time period. Like I think looking at old ads and stuff like that, I don't know, it makes me feel like a kid again. Like I really like that stuff, even though I wasn't necessarily like a kid during that era. So I've read it. I read through a bunch of those. There's an article in that magazine that comes up over and over, which is called Wizards 3, I think. which is Ed Greenwood, who designed the Forgotten Realms, doing a thing where 3 wizards from different settings. I think one of them from Dragonlance, one of them is Mordenkainen, and then the other one is Elminster from Forgotten Realms. They all meet in his kitchen and discuss new spells and stuff like that. And then at the end of the article, there's a bunch of, And I thought that was such a funny idea. It's kind of big-headed of me, but I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to steal Ed Greenwood's idea. So I just made up my own version of Elminster, who I've had kind of knocking around in my game for ages.
Yeah.
And I had them kind of, I don't know, I changed the framing device a little bit and made it kind of a newsletter type thing, and pitched it to James, and he was keen on it. So the rest is history.
I think it's kind of fascinating because it touches on where I think most people's kind of campaigns, they do have like a high, you got to have like the like big wizard character.
You got to have a Gandalf,
You got to have your Gandalf just to pop in occasion and for the party to be like, hey, can you do this for us? And they're just like, I'm too busy. I've got, you get me for one episode or one session and then I'm teleporting away and you'll see me at the big bad boss.
Absolutely.
But no, I do find that like I do like the idea of like almost like a wizard book club of big wizards getting together and kind of like creating this like little collection of spells.
Yeah, that is definitely an example of something that I was like, after I felt inspired, like because I love that article so much. I was like, how would I deploy this at my own table? I have a player currently who's starting out as a wizard. I was like, I think that she would just like it if there was like kind of a mail drop that she got to be privy to every couple of sessions, or
like almost like a wizard subscription of sorts of just
totally. I just thought that was an interesting way to integrate it.
So for the actual kind of like spells itself, it says that obviously there's like 9 in them. Do you have like a personal favorite, or is that like picking children? Am I being mean by asking that?
No, I feel like maybe I have some favorites. There's definitely some standout ones. I like Scryspike a lot. I think that is maybe the most interesting idea mechanically, just because it's like I've always felt that scrying senses are so weird and interesting. The idea that if you have see invisibility on or anything like that, you can see a weird little eye like following you around. And I've always felt like, well, what next? Like if you can see it, somebody's spying on you. It would be great if you could attack it or something like that. And so that is kind of purely a mechanical idea that I felt inspired to do. But I can't think of any other ones off the top of my head that are favorites. I like wielding a lot because I feel like that feels like it could be something out of the 80s, I guess. That was what I was going for with that.
I think it sounds like especially when it comes to kind of like designing spells, I really like kind of almost leaning to like the kind of the functional use cases. I think the same kind of applies to like magic items, because in a way, like when some magic items are just like, hey, you can cast this spell, that they're kind of like one of the same. And it's always trying to think of like, okay, well, what kind of like what use cases would this like spell item have, and how do we kind of like, I guess, kind of reward player kind of creativity. Which is why things like, the immovable rod always comes back as like it on the surface. Everyone looks at it and goes, I'm never going to need this in my life. And then, the smart players, like they're already like, gigabraining all the ways they can break the game with just this one little stick.
I think immovable rod has got to be right up there as one of the best kind of items of all time, just for the sheer like, I can't think of an item in my own game that has been used in more kind of creative ways than that one, by players doing ridiculous things.
I remember I once, so I had a player in my party who was quite savvy to the power of the immovable rod. And so I caught them once with a kind of like shady dealer who was selling what movable rod. And every time they were saying this is a movable rod, they would always movable rod, and they just assumed that it was like some sort of like speech tick, or it wasn't that. So when they bought the immovable rod and it was very much movable, it was a good gotcha moment for a second. They got their rod in the end, but it was just for the little one session cackle. But sorry, there. I sort of regaled you with a little anecdote there. onto the kind of like Aces High kind of side of things again, which is I feel like on the other end of a spectrum of like a Wizardly weekly subscription magazine of just being diving about in the skies. I'm curious, is there kind of like a similar kind of like tale of inspiration kind of behind that, or
similar sort of, I guess. I think I've spoken about this a little bit. That one is entirely music based. So I've just been walking around for years listening to the Iron Maiden song Aces High and thinking that it would be a sick soundtrack for a dragon dogfight.
Yeah.
And that is the entirety of that idea. I was like, I think that song is so good. And that was it really. I just listened to that song on loop the whole time that I made those rules.
So is that kind of like a trend for like your creative process normally? So because I know there's a lot of people, they do like mood boards, they make like soundtracks for like certain kind of like projects. Is it just literally just for Aces High that you just had Aces High on loop, or are there other projects where you've kind of associated like a soundtrack or something to it?
I think the soundtrack with Aces High, it was kind of just the one song. I probably listened to some more of that album because Power Slave is the best, despite what people say. Power Slave is the best Iron Maiden album. But definitely, yeah, I think that in terms of like mood boards and getting in the right kind of zone, music is definitely huge for a lot of stuff. Like there's a lot of I can think of a lot of other projects that it's probably the biggest kind of inspirational thing for me because it's something that I can do while working without it being too much of a distraction.
Interesting. I must admit, so I don't know, like I think at least my approach is that I don't always necessarily notice the kind of inspiration that, like, especially because basically the way I listen to music is very kind of sporadic, and I just like my playlist bounce about all over the place. So 1 minute I am going from like Iron Maiden to, I don't know, I was about to say the Wiggles, but I don't think that's I don't want people to think I have the Wiggles on. Just something
send me that playlist.
Yeah, insert
huge Wiggles
band to contrast the Iron Maiden.
And I get what you're saying though. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I kind of pass around. But I think there definitely have been times where I'm kind of writing a sentence and I feel it getting, I don't know, like angsty as it like falls in the kind of like Fall Out Boy or like My Chemical Romance pit that I've got, and then as it kind of comes out, I think it's that case of where, because I don't consider myself musically talented, that I think it would take me a lot of effort to try and actively consider to put together a playlist. Unless it kind of, again, it was as kind of inspirational as kind of like Aces High, I suppose.
Totally. I feel like it is a very kind of idiosyncratic thing, right? Like to me, the only reason that works is because it's no effort. Like I already kind of put together playlists for myself to listen to just because it's fun for me to drag and drop songs. Like I get a little bit of serotonin out of it, so I'm doing it anyway. And I feel like that is kind of a big part of the process, is recognizing the different things that are already kind of low effort for you to do, and then going with your gut on them, if that makes sense. Kind of go with the flow. Like, I know other people who are way more inspired by like movies and TV and stuff like that, and it's no effort for them to be putting aside time to watch movies or something like that, for example, because they're already doing it.
I guess it's kind of like a decent message into just doing some introspective thinking about who you are as a creative, to kind of see where your inspiration sources stem from, and just kind of like attuning yourself, and just again, if you get deeply inspired by music, kind of allowing yourself that time to fall in and get inspired, kind of thing.
And I feel like there's also kind of an element among people, when I've talked to people about this before, of feeling like maybe that's not a legitimate enough source of inspiration or something like that. Like I feel like it can be easy to kind of trick yourself into thinking that those ideas like aren't necessarily good enough, if that makes sense. But I feel like ideas are just ideas. It's how you execute them that really matters, because ideas can come from literally anywhere. Like you can just be walking down the street and get something from something.
I think that there is a good amount hinging on the idea, or like the concept of like almost like divine inspiration, like the idea that you would find this muse that you would be so kind of like enraptured with. Totally. not to beat a dead horse, but Goblin Cannon,
I think that this is me doing this podcast is your divine sign to put
honestly,
together Goblin Cannon.
There was another podcast where I tried to name drop it as many times as possible, but this is becoming a quick contender. Thankfully, I space him out, so not every episode the people listening aren't like, here he goes again, he's on about that Goblin Cannon. But I guess so back on topic about Ace Attire, in a kind of mechanical sense. Were there any kind of I guess difficulties in kind of bringing across, I guess, because you want dogfights to kind of be speedy, you want them to kind of feel that kind of ebb and flow of two creatures kind of at it in the sky. How did you find kind of, I guess, translating those aspects mechanically?
Good question. The answer is really bad. There was a huge amount of tension. I got super frustrated with that system before I turned in the first draft because I just could not make it play nice with the existing 5e action economy, which you can't remove. It's the whole game basically.
Yeah.
And so since then, I kind of I made myself a promise after doing that. I was like, you're not going to do kind of rules again for an existing game, because it's really annoying to try to have everything kind of match up. I have since reneged on that promise. I've done it again, but I mean, sometimes stuff comes up and you don't really have a choice. But I think that is definitely one of the most difficult kind of design issues, is if you're trying to create something that is kind of like a standalone game.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to integrate with somebody else's game, because I don't know, design is always kind of a personal thing, and there are design choices in 5e that I just don't agree with. So you don't always necessarily know what those design choices are until you bump up against them trying to design something new, and you're like, I didn't realize that this was a problem for me, but now it is. So really difficult, I think, probably. Quite frustrating. And I know that other designers have kind of talked about that stuff in the past too, but
I think that
again, worth it. I think
it's with any kind of system, there are definitely kind of limits, and once you kind of begin to kind of reach those limits of pushing the kind of boundaries of what exists within the game, then you kind of have the kind of the rub. But I guess to kind of put a positive spin on it, if anything. What was the point, would you say, when everything kind of clicked for you then? If the kind of initial draft was kind of that frustrating getting blood from stone side of things. Or again, that's the assumption on my part. If it did click.
I don't know if there ever was kind of a moment. I feel like whenever I kind of got frustrated with it, I would just go back and listen to that song, and I'd be like, this is still worth it because the fantasy is so strong. So I don't know if there was ever kind of a moment where everything fell into place. It was just kind of, sometimes there is, but most of the time it's just kind of a slog.
I must admit, so this goes back to literally what I just said moments ago about that divine inspiration. I think again, the kind of idolized project scope, that you do have that moment of it's the struggle, and then you hit that point, and then it's smooth sailing from there. But no, most projects are just it's there's highs and lows. But then
I feel like in many ways every project is completely different.
Yeah. No, sorry. The point is, it's. I agreed so hard. The sentence just stopped.
Sorry.
No. Every project is different.
Right,
but then done. I guess the kind of throughout a project, then would you say despite kind of all the differences they kind of have, what would you say are some of your favorite, and then vice versa, your least favorite parts of a project then?
That's a good question. I feel like my favorite part is the thinking about it part, because it's very easy and fun. Maybe that sounds like kind of a cop-out as well, but I do feel like spending time kind of imagining things and fantasizing about what you're trying to capture and stuff like that, I think that is a very big and kind of important part of design. And it is easily the most enjoyable because there's no effort required really at all.
No, I was going to say a slight analogy I kind of have is when you kind of imagine drawing something, and you kind of have that image in your head, And then at least kind of within the first, like, at least with me, I'm not the best at drawing, but within the first like 3 lines, I'm like, this is going to be a bad drawing. And unfortunately, when it comes to things like, game design or, it's kind of like a more drawn out process that you don't necessarily like the conceptual to the finished product again, it's a lot longer than those 3 lines of like, this isn't going to look like a horse or what have you.
It definitely is kind of like sort of I'm struggling to think of a good analogy for it, but I know what you mean. I feel like you've kind of got it in the drawing thing. Like it's not kind of a paint by numbers thing. It's always very kind of fluid, and you have to be able to adapt and improvise even while doing something so rigid as kind of game design. So I feel like my favorite part of any project is the in between moments where I have ideas or feel inspired to go back and work on it. Although I feel like, to give a more concrete example of a part of a project that I typically enjoy, even though it is kind of bricklaying, is naming things. I think
interesting.
I really enjoy it. It can be quite frustrating because I feel like sometimes I will start a project and then I'll stop it because I'll be like, before I can go any further, I need to figure out what everything in this project is called. And that ends up informing, I think, a lot of where the project goes, because I think names are super, super important. I probably put more time into naming things than anything else. I take a lot of pride, I think, in coming up with names that I like.
Mm-hmm.
That's another example of me thinking about like, how would I do this at my own table? Because like, I know that names probably don't matter to a lot of players and a lot of DMs. Like, a lot of other people, probably any name will do, but they matter to me quite a lot. Like, I don't want to use a name for anything, whether it's like a magic item, a character, or a place, or anything, unless I really like it and I feel like it has a history that I understand.
Yeah.
So that's a totally personal thing. And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it, but I do kind of derive a lot of enjoyment from it, I guess.
No, I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking, I guess a little bit deeper then, is like, so what is your, like, I guess, process for naming? So kind of, do you kind of go, I know like there's a lot of authors and kind of who like to kind of go the kind of like finding almost like the meaning behind words and names, and then kind of almost doing like a kind of a conglomeration of multiple kind of meanings behind words to kind of catch the essence of the thing? Or is it
that's a good example. I definitely feel like I've done that before. I feel like it again can kind of be different for different things. For places and people, I usually take probably a lot of inspiration from real world languages, and I try to find some kind of analog for a place or a culture on Earth that has something that sounds kind of correct. And then and then with naming other things, I think the process is also, for me, a lot of the time it has to not sound like other fantasy stuff. Or if it does, it has to sound like kind of a version of it that has some bite, some spice.
And in some cases, resisting the urge for a pun.
Yeah, and in some cases, not resisting the urge for a pun.
You're allowed like 2 or 3. You got, again, I think that's every, you're allowed like one.
They've got to be good. They've got to be good. They've got to be worth it. They have to be worth the calories.
So then I guess on the other side of the coin then, so if naming is like your favorite part, what would you say is your least favorite part
then? I think that the editing phase of projects can be trying, mostly because I worry about the other people that I have to work with, in terms of, I feel like sometimes I can probably be a little bit of a prima donna about some of that stuff. And I'm like, I really hope that people are okay with me being annoying to work with. But I think that is probably one of those kind of just typical anxieties that a lot of people share. Like, I think that worrying about that stuff is probably pretty normal. And I try to put as much effort as I can into not being like that. And taking criticism as well as I can. But that is just one of those kind of like typical creative things, I guess. And I wouldn't say I don't enjoy it, actually. Like, I actually really enjoy the editing phase of Aces High, for example, was probably my favorite part of that project, because it involved a lot of testing, and the testers came back with stuff that I found super insightful and very, I appreciated that a lot. I think I was very lucky to be able to work with such a good team. So yeah, I think sitting down to start is always the least enjoyable part. It's those first 3 lines, right? Where you're like, oh no. But like, once you get going, I feel like it's sort of fine. You have to get into it. It's like swimming in a cold ocean.
It's almost a good chunk of it is kind of consistency as well. Is that part of like, once you kind of start writing, it's kind of bit by bit. Like, there's always going to be sections that, again, you are passionate about, writing.
You just have to you have to find them.
Yeah.
But you can't get there without doing it, and doing it involves making a decision to stop mucking about and sitting down, and that is always the most difficult thing. That's the hugest barrier that I come across, and that also I don't think ever be enjoyable.
Yeah. I was I'm also very much kind of with you on like the editing front. I think editing is kind of at its best when it is that kind of like open kind of conversation. And sometimes, again, you are kind of like, there are times where, the editor can be like, you should delete this chunk. And you're just like, but I know I like this one, like this little 3-word combo in the middle. Can we salvage this, please, in some way? And that's kind of how you kind of like work from there. It's like, okay, what are you trying to do? And then you can kind of pull it apart, and then reach a point where everyone's happy.
I feel like being able to communicate is. I'm very lucky that I think that all of the editors that I've worked with have been very like understanding and great at communicating and stuff like that. So we can have conversations like that when stuff like that comes up. Like, I've very occasionally someone will suggest like, can we change this? Can we cut this? And I'm like, personally, to me, that is the whole point of the whole thing. Yeah. So the answer is no. Yeah. But I feel like that doesn't come up very often. Like, usually when people want to cut something, it's for a good reason. Yeah. And I appreciate that most of the time, or probably all of the time. I can't really think of any examples where this isn't the case. But editors are very good at explaining why they want to do the things that they want to do.
It's nice to sometimes have those kind of like, you're diving to the defense of your manuscript. You're like, no, to cut this is to cut out the heart of the document. And then, but for the most part, those moments don't really exist. I must admit, I don't know. I feel like I have a tendency to try and like almost like cinemize. I'm just making up all words this podcast. What is it?
Cinemize. That's a good one. That sounds cool.
To make, I guess to make things theatrical.
Probably
the more appropriate, but I'm going to stick with cinemize. We're in a digital age now. Theatre's dead. Geez. Maybe it's just the time of day that it just brings out that side of me.
I feel like you should record at 10 p.m. more often.
I should do. This is the best part is that I don't know whether this is just me normally, and maybe now I'm just being a little bit more introspective, or maybe this is just the 10 p.m. vibes. It's late. People are getting a little bit loopy. It's the best time. I'm going to stop myself rambling by asking you another question, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it. I'm having a blast, by the way. This is great.
Yeah, no, me too. Like I said, I like it. Yeah, I'm having fun. I was going to ask if so across kind of everything you've kind of done, then if there's been any kind of particular design choices that you kind of have made that kind of like stand out as like, I'm quite proud of what I did there.
Yeah. Occasionally stuff like that comes up where in hindsight, I'm like, you know what? I think that's cool. I can think of one recently that I can't talk about because it's under NDA. Yeah. But
please don't break the NDA for the sake of the podcast. It's all
I'll talk about that at a later date, I guess. All of the stuff that I've done for MCDM is not under NDA though, so I can talk about all of that. I feel like I had some examples. So there's a couple of examples from MCDM things that aren't out, but I know Matt Koffel has talked about them before. So in Player's Guide to Capital, I designed, I think, one of the there were a few titles. Titles are like kind of achievements that players can unlock, and then they get some cool ability. And if you are part of the Assassin's College in the city of Capital, you can become a Master of Stealth. You can achieve the Diploma Master of Stealth. And it gives you the ability to, I think it's like once a day. If you fail a check to hide and somebody notices you, you can swap it so that they decide that they saw a trick of the light or something instead, and they can rub their eyes like, what? And then they ignore it.
Just the wind.
Which is like, there's nothing in there design wise, like that is basically not that interesting in terms of design wise, but I just think it's kind of fun, and short to the point.
Yeah. I do also like the idea of like the assassins like college of like handing out degrees at like almost like a graduation ceremony of like, here is your masters of stealth.
The exams are terrible.
I'm sorry, I just had the idea of like a professor standing at like the front of like an empty room going, you've all done fantastically, I can't see anyone in this room, this is A-star students, all of you.
That's very good. I probably have some other examples as well. There's an upcoming project, a fun teaser for anybody who's following the MCDM stuff, and probably already knows that I have been working on the Dark Dream, which is a mind flayer ship that will come out at some stage. I cannot speak to when that will come out, but if anybody wants to listen to this and then go find out what I'm talking about, I'm particularly fond of Area C3. So that's a fun Easter egg. But because that isn't something that people can check out now, I think there's also some stuff in Kingdoms and Warfare. I was lucky enough to do all of the devils, I think, the Court of the Seven Cities in Kingdoms and Warfare. And I think that designing monsters is usually my favorite thing to do. And I'm particularly fond of the Law Devil in that book, because they have an attack called Spell Drain, which is extremely fun.
Is it like fun, or is it like fun?
It's probably the latter. It's probably fun in quotes. It's definitely fun for me.
Yeah,
I've heard a couple of people say that players are not a fan of it because it involves the Law Devil. If they can get close enough to touch you, they can suck a prepared spell out of your brain.
Yeah.
So you lose the chance to cast that spell, and then the devil also regains hit points equal to the level of the spell times 10.
That's nasty. That's good.
Yeah, don't let them touch you.
Yeah. I was gonna say the Kingdom, that's gonna be a chunky book, isn't
it? It is, yeah. So the physical copies are not out yet because of the shipping apocalypse, ongoing kind of like paper shortage, and then boats around the world not being able to go places. But I'm predicting that it will be substantial. Yeah.
Jeez.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah. No, I kind of echo kind of the statement of, again, the designing monsters is always a kind of like a unique challenge, and it sometimes you do kind of have that leeway, particularly as like a monster designer, and thinking through the lens of like a DM of like, we can be a little bit evil here. Like, sometimes this creature may get this ability off, maybe like once, or maybe they never get it off, but it's kind of, the possibility of it happening is always kind of
yeah.
Nice. Oh, cool. And then I guess to kind of like round things off, then kind of round the questions on like your creative process. Is there like a particular like lesson that you've kind of wish you'd maybe learned sooner, or like something that in reflection you feel like it maybe would have been nice to
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, right? Like I feel like there's several of these have kind of already come up just kind of organically as we've been talking. Because there's a lot of like advice out there, and but I feel like a lot of the lessons that you learn, they kind of only come slowly through practice, through doing stuff.
There's always an element of like, even if like I could go back like to like when I first started and tell myself things, I don't know if I necessarily would, because a good chunk of it is...
I absolutely wouldn't listen to myself.
Yeah, right?
If I could time travel and be like, hey, you need to learn this lesson now, I'd be like, sure, I already know that, but you don't. Like, so maybe that's kind of it. But like, there was something that you said earlier that I felt like totally was a lesson that I feel like I wanted... once I kind of got it, I was like, oh, I definitely should have learned that earlier. But I'm struggling to remember what it was. I think
Was it Goblin Cannon?
I think it might have been Goblin Cannon. Yeah. No. I'm fully serious. I feel like it might have been Goblin Cannon. I think the idea is, for a long time. Okay, so do you want like a design? This is kind of more of a DMing lesson than a design lesson, but I feel like
honestly, like a lesson, yeah.
I feel like for a long time I would come up with ideas that I was excited about, such as Goblin Cannon, and then sit on them kind of waiting for a perfect moment. And I feel like you said before, that perfect moment's never going to come. And I feel like that's so true. Like, I think honestly, like allowing yourself the freedom to just be like, I am going to find a way to put Goblin Cannon into the next session I run, is something that I wish I learned earlier in terms of running the game. Because like I definitely, if you hold on to these kind of like cool moments as a DM, you just don't need to. You just don't need to. I feel like there's kind of a worry. Sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like there's kind of a worry among DMs to like get it perfect, and so you kind of sit on them for the ideas that you're really happy about for ages. But I think that the other half of that coin, the other side of that coin, is the understanding that it won't be perfect. Like you have to be okay with the idea that you'll try something and it just won't go over well, and then onto the next thing, right?
I was gonna say, like there is the perfect almost like project like design analogy of that is like sometimes there are projects where you sit on them where you're just like, I feel like I'm not, like, you're not ready for a project yet.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like again, I've been telling myself I'm not ready for Goblin Cannon, but by goddamn I am.
I think you should do it. Well, it's all practice, right? Like I think that the idea it can be difficult because I feel like sometimes there are certain projects. I've definitely shelved projects where I'm like, you know what, I'm just not good enough at writing to be able to do this right now. I need to do some other stuff before I can give it the time of day. But it is all, at the same time, it is all practice. Like there is no getting good enough to do the thing that you actually want to do. Like you should just do the stuff that you actually want to do and treat it all as practice. There's no end point. There's no goal. Like just the practice itself is kind of the thing.
It's because I have been treating Goblin Cannon as if that's my retirement project. Like once I do that, I'm out. I'm out the industry. That's going out and to like mic drop. I'm out. I don't think I can recover.
What a swan song.
But you can have more than one song. I'm sure. So honestly, so Sam, looking at the time, we've done it. An hour has well and truly gone. But obviously, so some of the questions that I like to round the podcast on, I don't want to leave without kind of asking them.
No, totally.
So almost as like a quick fire question then is one. Well, I won't ask them all at once. Ask them one at a time because that makes sense as a podcast host. Again, you've through working on Uncaged and MCDM, there's been like a good amount of kind of collaboration that you've kind of been involved in. In the kind of community as a whole, who have been like, I guess, some of the figures of people that you've kind of worked alongside with that have kind of been, sources of inspiration, or you kind of like it's been a pleasure to work with, kind of thing.
I mean, James Intricazo definitely comes to mind first and foremost. I think I've probably done more work with him than anybody else. He's probably like the direct liaison that I have with MCDM, and he really is like super understanding, pleasure to work with, lets me get away with murder. Not
literally, I hope.
No, not literally. And I think forever indebted to the fact that I have the kind of joyous task of throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall, and then he's the one who has to actually make it work, which like I am very apologetic about whenever I get the chance to be, because I feel like I'm quite lucky with regards to that relationship. But I definitely have a lot of people in the community that I haven't worked with who I find very inspiring as well. And most of them are like not D&D, right?
Yeah.
Like so I feel like when I'm working on stuff, I like to pull ideas and inspiration from all over the place. I'm a huge fan of Massive Press, who make Icon and Lancer. Lancer is such a cool looking game that I have not had the chance to play yet, but I am super inspired by all of the work that they do. I'm very inspired by Wander Home. That's a cool game. Hardwired Island is a project that I've really enjoyed following, and I love that team. I try to keep up with the people who make Eclipse Phase. That's a great game that people should check out if they like sci-fi.
I must admit, I think there's definitely those projects out there that you look at and you just your mind, the gears in your mind start turning about like, oh, there's so much
absolutely,
potential.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, who else? I'm hugely inspired by Caleb Stokes, who writes a lot of stuff for Delta Green, I think, at the moment, and made a game a couple of years ago called Red Markets, which I'm a huge fan of. And I steal stuff out of that all the time. Shouts out. And I can't think of anybody else off the top of my head. Monty Cook, I guess. I follow his newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a huge kind of collection of like, again, fantastic kind of awesome looking games and no doubt fantastic designers kind of all behind them all. But I guess to kind of turn the lens back onto you, as a closing kind of remark, then, what are like some of the things that you're working on that you, again, asterisks that you can talk about? And kind of more importantly, where can people kind of, stay up to date and hear about all your work?
So currently I'm working on my next Arcadia article with James. So I'm excited for that. I don't know when that'll be coming out. It is, I think, a two-parter. So that's exciting. That is exciting. No spoilers. Yeah. I will not talk about what it's about, but you can find Arcadia, I think, through the MCDM Patreon is the best place to get it. You can buy the issues, I think, separately on the store, but the Patreon gives you access to the back catalog, so you get them all cheap. And then I'm also kind of, I'm semi in between other projects at the moment. So I've been putting all of my free time into a personal kind of project, which I don't know, in however many years might be something that I would be excited to put out on the DMsGuild just under my own name at some stage. And that is called The Drowned Knight, and it will be a adventure, probably the first in a series of 3. But that is a massively ambitious project, which I plan to have like an actual budget for, which means that there is a high chance that it will not come together. but we'll see. I'm going to keep working on it.
People love a trilogy. It's kind of,
yeah. And you can follow, I think the best place currently for updates on the stuff that I'm doing is if you follow me on Twitter at Cryptic Parlor, spelt with a O and a U and an R on the end.
Nice. Again, so there'll be a whole bundle. I was about to call it a hodgepodge. I'm going to stick with hodge. There'll be a whole hodgepodge of links in the description and stuff like that, so people can stay up to date and make sure they're following and seeing that, again, a whole bundle of the things that we've had the kind of pleasure to kind of chat about through this
awesome
podcast. But no, honestly, Sam, thank you. It's been a delight from start to finish.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, again, I can only apologize and say thank you for enduring my rambling. I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. And closing question, my favorite question, and the final one, thankfully, is Sam, how do you end a podcast?
It's a good question. I mean, one of us has to hang up, but I don't want it to be me. So
okay. Well,
I think you should hang up.
Yeah, first. I'll just hang up. So this is I wish I had a phone on my hand and stuff like that, but I'm professional and I throw that away. So yeah, I'll just